All right, let's start looking ahead. Baylor basketball needs this in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on YouTube. Joining me today, back-to-back guests here, Jackson Posey of the Baylor Lariat, Don't Feed the Bears fame. We're going to talk to him about what went wrong this season. And I know we've thrown some theories out there, but one or two things that kind of brought this team down to a 9 seed for the first time in a long time that we've seen them in that position. Plus, who is Scott Drew going to be searching for in this portal? A position, a certain kind of player, a certain kind of place where that player's coming from. We'll look at that. And are there new expectations for this program as well? All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. Jackson Posey, by Jackson Posey, like a headline is by Jackson, or story by Jackson. Byline, that's the word I'm looking for. See how long it's been since I've been in print? It's been a while. Of the Baylor Lariat and Don't Feed the Bears, which you can listen to as well. Jackson, you said after this game on Sunday, the men's game, after they lost to Duke, you said you're going to miss this team, which I was surprised by. Look, there's been a lot of headaches on this team, but tell me why you're going to miss this team, what you kind of saw in this team that was endearing to you.
Yeah, I mean, there were clearly some roster construction problems that became more evident as the injuries sort of mounted up throughout the season. But this was a team that showed a lot of grit later on in the season. I think Norchad Omier stands as sort of the pinnacle of this idea, right? When everything comes crashing down, you just throw him out there for 37, 38 minutes a game, and he just gets boards. And you saw that early on against Duke, right? 3 offensive rebounds in the first 2.5 minutes. And alongside, star freshmen, you got your VJ Edgecombe, you got your Robert Wright, who I was stumping for since before the season started. I think this was a team that is kind of marks what the new era of Baylor basketball probably will look like, where it is a lot of new guys, whether that's freshmen who are expected to play really significant minutes as starters, whether that's transfers who come in and maybe you get the really high highs with the Norchad Omier. Maybe you get some lower lows with players like Jeremy Roach, who had a big regression to the mean this season. But I think this is the type of team that you're more likely to see going forward. And I'm going to miss the type of chemistry that they were able to find despite all of those injuries. I don't think you're necessarily going to find guys who are as big a fan of each other as Robert Wright and VJ Edgecombe were throughout the year. And I don't think you're going to have an aggressive offensive rebounder the way Norchad Omier was as well. And those type of high effort intensity defense guys are really the ones that I love watching as a more schematically inclined guy.
A ball knower.
Ball knower.
What you're trying to say.
Many are saying this.
Is what you're trying to say. Well, the jury's still out. We really gotta earn ball knower status. And it's fleeting, man. Every day it can be taken away from you. Rent is due every day on being a ball knower.
And I picked Duke to win every game so far in the NCAA tournament. And I'm undefeated on that route.
And I'll say this, I do think you're a bit of a ball knower, Jackson. And so before the year, you had some high expectations for this team. I think we all did. I did. You had Final Four. I think I had Elite Eight. I think we both had them competing, if not winning, the Big 12 championship in a loaded Big 12, especially in the preseason top 10. And they go out in the second round as a 9 seed. So big question that we're still trying to nail down the answer to, because we're looking into next year soon. What went wrong for this team? Was it a player? Was it new coaches, playing style? Like one or two things that you've put your thumb on looking back of we really didn't have the team we thought we would after this.
Yeah, I'll give you one stat, right? Because we can talk about injuries all day long. Langston was out, Jeremy Roach was out, Josh O was out. Here's the real thing that I think was the problem. You go into the season expecting this to be potentially the best three-point shooting team in the country. They wind up outside the top 100. They wind up outside the top 100, not only in three-pointers made, but also three-pointers attempted and three-point percentage. You're shooting under 35% as a team for a team that went into the year expecting to be, at the very least, tops in the Big 12. 4 guys expected, at least that I expected, to shoot at least 39% from 3. The analytics back that up preseason. And once you actually get in there, you struggle, one, to get volume off. right? This is a team that, because they didn't have those consistent driving pressures on the inside, you were able to kind of sell out to guard on the perimeter more. And that forced players like Jalen Celestine to just constantly be face guarded on the outside. And so on the actual like shooting percentages, you wind up with only one guy shooting at least 35.5% from three, that being Jaden Nunn shooting 41%. Outside of that,
Did
Celestine's
he
at
shoot
35.
1%?
41% on 4.5 attempts a game. So he struggled early on, but later on in that season, once, Roach's injuries and Love's injuries started piling up, like Jaden Nunn really became that guy.
And the volume's still not that great though for a team that's struggling so much from
Yeah.
three. I'd like Jaden Nunn to shoot 5 or 6 threes. If he's going to shoot 40%, I'm like, okay, man, you can be our guy here, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Three different guys tied for the team lead with 4.6 per game, and he was one of them.
Okay.
The other guy was Jalen Celestine, who was second, and the other guy outside of that was VJ Edgecombe, who shot 34% from three. I think you're probably fine with those shots at the end of the day, but when you only have three guys who are just scraping the surface at 35%, everybody else is below that. You've got Langston Love shooting 32.5% on 4.5 attempts a game. That's just frankly not good enough for a team that really expected to live and die by the three, for a team that was so heavily built on undersized perimeter play. You need those shots to start falling, and you need a lot of them to start falling, and that just wasn't happening this year.
And I would love to see, because I totally agree with you. Like the 3-point shooting, it's something we didn't even really notice by the middle of the season because we were just so resigned to the fact that they're not a 3-point shooting team, which they have been for so long. Obviously, that was most of the Jacobs system, but they had good shooters. Like they were a team that could go on these quote unquote runs of death because they were hitting threes and they could kick out off offensive rebounds and hit threes. And you had a pretty good year offensive rebounding wise. I know it waxed and waned a little bit, but to not be able to have those kick out threes was a tough loss for Baylor. And the other thing that I thought of towards the end of the season was like, man, it's not the only fix they need, but what if we just had like a knockdown shooter again, a guy who was just a shooter, the way Adam Flagler was early in his career before he became an All-American, right? Where he was just a guy where you're like, Adam, space the floor and get open from three. We know you're going to hit him. You're going to be important for us in transition, in the half court, off offensive rebounds, all of these things. And they haven't had that, I would say, since LJ Cryer left. Now, Jalen Bridges was a very good 3-point shooter, but he was obviously doing a lot for the Bears, not just being a knockdown 3-point guy. So I think that is something they need to look for when looking in the transfer portal. There was plenty of issues this year, but Jackson, I think you nailed it on the head there. Like Jeremy Roach was not an effective 3-point shooter. Jaden Nunn sounds like more effective than I thought from the eye test. But VJ at one point in the season becomes your best 3-point shooter and your most volume 3-point shooter in like January, and it's like that's not the formula that this team needs. And you could see it when Duke was trading threes for twos, even in the first half of that game. So it's something yeah.
Oh, and I would just throw out there too, I think Jalen Celestine could be that guy. And I think it was more of a roster construction problem after Josh Ojanwuna's injury that really sort of tanked his percentages early on in the year before that injury, shooting almost 39% on pretty decent volume. Afterwards, he shoots 30% the rest of the way. So after that UCF game, 30% from three, from a guy who came in expecting to shoot, at least 40% from three. In his career, he's shooting 38% even after this year. And so I think a lot of it was guys being forced out of their role. Langston Love's a guy who shot better from three earlier on in his career. Again, he's guarding those bigger matchups, getting worn down, having to play more on the inside. And so once you have that stronger interior presence, you're not putting everything on offensive rebounding. Scott Drew said in a press conference a couple weeks ago, he's like, yeah, we're just having to send everybody to go get those offensive rebounds.
Yeah.
And when you're in that position, you can't spend as much effort running a lot of pin downs off ball. And okay, I'm going to set this double drag screen on the outside. And like, you just don't have that level of capacity because of how much you're having to crash the boards.
So how do we make this better? That is the big question. And that's what Jackson Posey and I are going to, mostly Jackson, is going to tackle next on Locked On Baylor. But first, let me ask you a question. Okay, you guys ever look at your bank account and wonder, where the heck did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check all your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first order. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDON, COLLEGE, for half off your first year. Running it back with Jackson Posey, Baylor Lariat star. Don't Feed the Bears co-host. Co-host?
Host.
Either way, host. Yeah, we'll call you host. A post that we've both held, by the way. Little crossover there. We've also done Locked On Baylor episodes together. I also think you are tackling this transfer portal. Like that's what Scott Drew is going to be doing over the days and weeks. In fact, by the time this drops on Thursday morning, there could even be some commitments already for all that we know. But this becomes a massively important transfer portal window. Baylor's had to replace a lot over the last couple of years in basketball, but not like this. This is replacing almost their entire roster, it looks like. And so this becomes a hopefully not a spring of our discontent here as they look to add to this roster and put together a team that can compete in 2025-26 coming off a 9-seed season. So Jackson, let's start with the abstract. What should Baylor be looking for in this spring transfer portal window?
Well, I think first of all, you need to look for more players that you're comfortable with putting in game situations. Baylor goes into this season with a very short rotation, even at the beginning. Once guys start going down, coaching staff didn't feel comfortable putting in a Jason Asemota or putting in a Marino Dubravcic until they really, really had to. And so if you have all of these end-of-bench spots reserved for players who maybe are great culture guys, maybe just aren't ready, that's fine in the abstract. But once you actually get into game situations, you're not going to have 9 guys stay healthy the entire season. You need someone else to backfill those minutes. And so I would be going into the season saying, okay, we need at least 10 guys who we feel comfortable day one putting into game situations against high major opponents, including 3 big guys. And maybe one of those guys could be a 4-5, right? It doesn't have to be 3 true centers. But I think that's the main thing you go into saying, okay, we don't need to overcorrect. We don't need 4 7-footers on the roster. But at a certain level, you have to have depth at the spots that matter, at the spots where, Baylor's great at developing guards. You can find guards. The emphasis needs to be on these other spots where over the past couple seasons, there's been a little bit of an issue getting consistency there.
So we talked about 3-point shooting, and you just talked about obviously the obvious need for front court depth that they did not have this year. And I'm wondering then, are they going to look for a different style of player? And by that I mean, last year they went for experience. Right? They went out and they got Norchad Omier, who obviously does play a certain style, and Jeremy Roach. Those are 2 guys who had played in the Final Four, had played a lot of basketball games, and that was clearly the intent from Scott Drew and staff and, rotating staff, that they were looking for experienced players who had been in those big games. So as we talk about the things they kind of lacked this year, is there any different type of player that you think they're looking for? Like, do you think they're going back to, if you even can, like an Yves Missi type player? Or are they looking back for a Maceo Teague, Adam Flagler type player? Those don't grow on trees, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think one of my top targets, if I were this coaching staff, which is a reason that I'm not, but the guy that I'm looking at right now is a San Diego State center named Magoon Gwath. And this is a Euless, Texas native. He's from the area. Only offer coming out of high school was San Diego State, but he's a 7-footer who shoots threes. And definitely not at the level of like leaving for the NBA this year. Has a lot of developing left to do.
Yes, sure.
But really well identified by Brian Dutcher and that staff at San Diego State, and was really sort of a highlight reel type player for the Aztecs this season. If you're looking to mix
only a freshman, by the way, only a freshman.
Yes, only a freshman. I would guess he leaves after his sophomore season for the NBA draft, but doesn't have to. And he's the type of guy where, okay, if you want to mix things up a little bit, if you want to get more 3-point shooting, I think that's the guy that you're thinking about in your brain and saying, okay, he can sort of change the calculus for us in not only the way that we build our perimeter offense, but also the way that we build our defense. I'm going to throw out a name here that I'm not comparing him to, but the Spurs are able to build their offense a lot differently because they have such a different maker on defense, right? You have that big
Yes.
long defender who can also shoot. Kristaps Porzingis, if you want to throw out a more realistic
I'd
name.
love that.
And
I mean,
yeah,
he's a
big
great
Kristaps guy
player,
over
but
there.
yeah.
But yeah, having that long guy who can shoot is huge, and I think that would be that's the name that I've been watching over this time. He's entered the transfer portal officially, and if Baylor can get him, I think that's the guy who fans are going to be really over the moon about.
By the way, Cyclone Larry approved as well on Twitter, who was
And
called
Cyclone Larry has great taste,
he's a
right?
ball knower. I mean, he has
Ball
earned
knower?
that. He pays rent on ball knowing. The other thing with Magoon too, which I like, is really in the last couple of years, Yves Missi was your only like disruptor. And that's a loaded definition, right? Because Norchad Omier does a ton down low. And he did a ton for keeping possessions alive and worked his butt off every second of every game. But I'm talking about like what Maluach is for Duke and what Yves Missi was for Baylor last year. And that is, don't even come down here. Like it's going to be sent back, returned to sender. And that kind of length they have not had outside of Yves Missi for 1 year. So that is someone that could bring that. Magoon Guath from San Diego State. He can absolutely bring that. And by the way, a fairly efficient shooter as well, not just the 3-point shooting. I mean, because you've brought up those numbers of he can get out there and stroke it a little bit from 3-point range. He shot 38%, which is pretty good. And that brought his overall shooting percentage down to 51%, which he'll still take for a 7-footer that's pretty raw. Any other names that have popped up to you? Again, we could have the Wyoming kid, Obi Agbeam. He might have already committed by the time this dropped. That's the name that we've heard. Cooper Schweigel from Valpo, which I've just learned are the Beacons. I never knew their mascot. It's tough to say no to a Coach Drew when you go to Valpo. So are there any other names that have popped up on your timeline that you're like, ooh, this could be a Baylor guy?
Yeah, I think real quick on the Yves Missi aspect, he
Okay, yes.
reclassified late in his year, and I think that's part of this year's team's issues, right? Is Yves Missi was supposed to
Good
be on
point.
the
Yeah.
24-25 team. I think if Yves Missi is on this roster, this whole season looks a lot different, right? But
Legend.
yeah, speaking about the transfer portal, there's a lot of Big 12 transfers out there. My dream would be Bryce Hopkins, right? I don't think that Baylor has a realistic shot at Bryce Hopkins, but I don't know that you need to go into the portal and get 3 All-Americans or something, right? I think if you can build very consistent depth and get 1 or 2 guys up there at the top, I think Rob Wright can be a guy who, I mean, certainly compete for first team All Big 12. And that's the foundation that you're building to say, okay, maybe we get 1 really consistent 4 or 5 man. If you get a strong Norchad Omier style 4-man alongside Magoon Guath, I think outside of that, you can just get 3-and-D role players, get 1 consistent bench creator, maybe 2, and you feel really good about that going forward. Donovan Dent out of New Mexico would be another guy. I'm pretty sure he's moving on to the Big East with Richard Pitino.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you get 1 or 2 more creators, and if you get a big man who can really pair well with Robert Wright, I don't know that you have to go for these star-studded, let's get multiple Final Four contributors that you went with this year. I think you can relax a little bit and say, okay, the whole board is open. Who can we get that's going to be consistent and ideally be here for multiple seasons?
How you feeling on Rob Wright coming back?
This is not me reporting, so don't aggregate me. But I feel pretty confident that he's coming back. I think this is a place that he really enjoys, and it's a system and a fit that is about to be built around him. Right? He is the guy moving forward, barring Bryce Hopkins walking through that door. And so I would feel pretty good about him coming back. I'm sure that the program is going to take care of him, especially with revenue sharing coming in this offseason. I would assume Baylor winds up being one of the more heavily basketball-centric revenue sharing programs. A lot of the teams around the country, especially in the power conferences, are giving $14 to $16 million to football alone. I would assume Baylor is going to be a little bit more towards the basketball side, still mostly football. But when you think about those Big East programs, we're talking about a Bryce Hopkins, where, okay, they can give $7, $8, $9 million to basketball because they
No
don't have any
football.
football programs to feed
Yep.
into, right? And so they
Oh,
might not have
both Patinos are going to be swimming in that, man. Two
Oh, yeah.
programs without football teams. Or at least, I don't know. Does Xavier play FCS? I don't know. Maybe they do. That's a good point. And that is all going to mold kind of how we look at this program going forward, which is what we're going to do next. We're going to talk about what the expectation should now be for Baylor basketball. That's next on Locked On Baylor. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. We're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MOP level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team, plus the gear, wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. So take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Jackson Posey, Baylor Lariat, don't feed the Bears. China spring football is what we're usually talking, him and I. But now we shifted to Baylor basketball as we have this whole episode. So it's been, for me anyway, like a week of bitching here. So like just what's gone wrong, how bad this was, how this is a mess. But now we look forward to transfer portal. And then we look forward to the future here because I think this is kind of a transitional year for Baylor basketball fans in terms of how we think of this. Because this past year, I think we all kind of got duped. You know, we talked about it. You picked Final Four, I picked Elite Eight, and that was not crazy. A lot of fans were thinking that with this roster that they had constructed. And it looked like, all right, we've got the old guys now. Here we go. We should be good. And it didn't work out that way. It was worse than last year. You know, they fall to a 9 seed. They're out in the second round for the 4th year in a row. So it looks like, and obviously college is different from the pros in this sense, but like that window of expecting or realistically dreaming of a Final Four or a national championship are probably over for now, if not totally on pause. And this is 4 straight losses in the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. You're replacing more of your team than you've had to probably ever from season to season as we go from 25 to 26. So my question to you, Jackson Posey, is what should Baylor basketball fans be expecting in the future? What would constitute good seasons for the program over the next few?
Yeah, I think, you've had second round exits every year since the national championship run. And this is a program that expects more. This is a top 5 coach in the nation. This is a really bought in fan base at a basketball school where that's not really the norm among big power conference schools. This is a school that just invested a ton of money in Foster Pavilion and is currently renovating Clifton Robinson Tower. And so that's probably staying for the time being. But
damn. Okay.
This is what happens when you read the Baylor Lariat news section, is you find out that they're renovating Clifton Robinson. But that aside, I think this is a program that really does deserve to have expectations that are higher than the first weekend. And I'm not going to blame the coach for all that. I think frankly, the people that are blaming the coach for that are way beyond their skis. There is not a single option that you could possibly get that would do better than Scott Drew with this program.
I agree.
But I think this is a program that should consistently expect to get to the Sweet 16. I look at Arkansas, strangely, as a sort of parallel here. They've made 4 of the past 5 Sweet 16s with multiple different coaches, and they're not necessarily that top tier, right? They're not the UConn, they're not the Duke, but they are a program that, as of right now, can consistently expect to make that type of headway. That's not necessarily institutional, right? That wasn't always the case at Arkansas. That probably won't always be the case at Arkansas. But during this regime, that's what they're looking for. And I think as long as Scott Drew is in Waco, you can have realistic expectations of this is a Sweet 16 type of school. Maybe they won't get there. Maybe they'll get a little farther. But as a general expectation, I think Baylor should consistently be competing for the second weekend in the NCAA tournament.
And by the way, like for context of this, for I guess some young Baylor fans or ones who got too used to that 21 team, like that's a good season. making the Sweet 16. That's the Tech fans, right? Like, that's a good season. And the way I've kind of talked about the team the last few days, I don't want it to get lost in that. Like, I think that is a good season. And if they somehow upset Duke on Sunday and they made it there, it's like this season was a success after it feeling like a failure for the whole year. Sweet 16 is pretty good. You know, I compared them to Michigan State because they make the Sweet 16 a lot. They're kind of always in the mix. They're not that national championship level. They've made a couple Final Fours for sure in the 2000s. But I like that Arkansas connection. Creighton would be another one, you know, that's not winning the conference championship, but Creighton especially, that team wins in March, man. They make the Sweet 16. They make the Elite Eight. Arkansas, same thing. They're not winning the SEC. It's going to be tough to win the Big 12, as competitive as it is. But Arkansas wins in March. They don't have like stud top 5 picks. They don't have a lot of one and dones. And as you said, they've done it with 2 different coaches as well. So Sweet 16, I think that's not bad, man. I really don't think that's bad. And in fact, I'd really welcome a Sweet 16 at this point. That would feel really nice to know that the tournament goes longer than one weekend. So, okay, we've established that Sweet 16 is where to look in the future. Jackson, I'm going to put you on the spot here on March 27th in the year of our Lord 2025, AD 2025, because the AD comes first. In short, what are your expectations for next year? I'm trying to word it in like, how much work do they need to do to get back to competitive next year?
Yeah, I think
How
it
much
is.
different is this offseason? Yeah.
I think it's such a blank canvas, even compared to last season, right? Because
Yeah.
you went into last offseason having Robert Wright, Langston Love, Josh Ojonwuna, right? Jaden Nunn. You're expecting Jason Asemota to potentially be able to contribute at some point. That's at least a
And
foundation of something.
Yeah.
You go into this offseason with Robert Wright and Jalen Celestine and maybe Josh Ojonwuna, but he'll almost certainly be out for the beginning of the season at the very least if he's back.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that there's just so many question marks remaining. Even Omar Degbala is transferring, right? So the guys who you were sort of developing at the end of the bench are gone, and now who's going to replace those minutes? So I think it's too early to even throw out like this is how well I think they'll do. I will say I think a lot of it is going to come down to what happens in the next week, right? Where maybe you don't get the very public commitments happening yet because the NCAA tournament's still happening, but the way that the coaching staff is working the phones in the next week is going to chart the path for the entire next calendar year for Baylor. And so if they're able to bring guys in, build a coherent roster, that's going to chart the path. And so that's a long-winded way of saying I don't know yet, but I think anyone who claims that they know at this point is probably just selling you beachfront property in Hewitt.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I was just throwing fecal matter at the wall and seeing what sticks, but I like that one better. Jay Poe, where can people find your work and keep up with your wall-to-wall Baylor athletics coverage?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at @ByJacksonPosey. I'm also a sports writer at the Baylor Lariat, host of Don't Feed the Bears on Spotify, and a lot of really nonsensical podcasting clips on Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to find me physically, please don't.
Yeah, don't tell them any more information there. But Jackson Posey does cover this team. I mean, all these teams, frontwards, backwards, sideways. I mean, he is everywhere on that campus and wherever Bears are sold. Anyway, Jackson, thank you so much for joining. Thank you guys for tuning in and making it your first listen today and every day. Get involved in the comment section below. Tell us how stupid we are, or how great we are, or how handsome Jackson is. Let us know in the comments what your expectations are for next year, what you're looking for in the transfer portal, what you're looking for from this program going forward. Let us know. Be sure to like and subscribe. Ring that notification bell to get notified every time we're dropping a video on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And we will see you tomorrow on your favorite show, Locked On Baylor.